Good evening, Commissioners. I don't know if you guys want to start. I can start. My name is Zach McCown, and I work as a representative for the Western States Regional Council of Carpenters. I live in Conway, Washington, 98273. Not sure if that's needed, but there it is. I'd like to start this public comment out by stating that there's not enough allotted time in this public comment to even scratch a surface on community benefit agreements, project labor agreements, or community workforce agreements. I'd be lying to state that I'm not in support of these agreements, but let's be clear. I'm not here tonight to participate in a workshop or a committee. I'm here to ask this board to take a neutral stance. I'm here to ask this board to listen to both sides before formulating an opinion. And I'm here to ask this board to not listen to just big business, but offer the same opportunity to the hardworking men and women who live in Bellingham and Whatcom County. I could have led this conversation with stating the number of municipalities, cities, counties who have listened to both sides and found enough in these conversations to adopt such language. I could have led with saying how Snohomish County just recently passed an ordinance for a community workforce agreement. I'm not leading with this because this is the port, and it is not any of those cities, municipalities, or counties listed. This is the Port of Bellingham. And this board makes decisions that impacts the lives of the constituents that it covers. I ask that everyone here tonight be curious, do some research, and if you would like to know more, set up a time where we can have a real productive conversation. Listen to both sides to ensure the most educated decision is made. I asked this group to invite labor to present their own PowerPoint, and at the end, let the best decision be made that impacts not just the port, but the people who live and work here every day. Thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
So our presentation is a presentation on proposed county ordinance presented by Pete Dawson, CEO of Dawson Construction, and Lance Calloway, AGC Northern District Manager.
Hello, and thank you, Commissioners, for hearing us. I'm Lance Calloway. I'm the Northern District Manager for Associated General Contractors of Washington. Our organization, we represent as a chapter 50% union, 50% non-union across the board. We first heard about this community benefit agreement when Kaylee Galloway, Councilmember Galloway, called a meeting on December 18th to present, and she had provided myself as well as several other local contractors who were invited to a meeting with a proposed document that had the language that we are discussing, a community benefit agreement, but it also had incorporated a lot of aspects of the project labor agreement. And the contractors that were in the room were all non-union contractors. And this is a concern to them because the project labor agreement does do many of the things like Carl and Zach talked about. It talks about apprenticeship. It talks about prevailed wage. But those are things that are all required currently anyways in state law. This past year, HB 1050 requires any municipal project right now, it's at about $2 million and above, has 15% apprenticeship. These contractors are aware of that. They've acquired their apprenticeship programs and they have their employees going through them. Prevailed wage, that is set by the state, and so that's set on every job. So there's no issue of who's getting paid what. It's based by the prevailed wages that are set by the state of Washington. But what does come into concern is the situation that takes place when a project labor agreement is engaged, in that it places a situation where the non-union contractors can compete, as what was said by our fellow labor partners. However, for those partners to compete, their workforce are required to become part of the union for the duration of the project. And so that means that these contractors are paying their wages, are paying the benefits into the union trusts, particularly the retirement one, and they're also taking care of paying the current retirement benefits, because when they're done with the project in a year or two, they're going to go on to another project. And so they want to make sure their employees don't lose out. Often these employees, when they're involved in these project labor agreements, they don't stay long enough to vest into these retirement benefits, and they forego those to the union. When Kaylee presented this caused a lot of concern for many of the contractors in the room, and we ended up, talking with a lot of folks, and quite honestly, I reached out to over 80 companies that, got back to me. They're representing nearly 5,200 workers that are in our community that would be impacted by this ordinance as it goes through with the project labor agreement language. This is a concern because many of the contractors told me their employees don't want to be signed on to a project labor agreement. You know, they realize that there's a lot of benefits that their company is providing them, and they're happy. These workers have a choice to unionize if they choose to do so, but they don't. We have nearly 80 companies, many of these you see every day going about on the streets of Whatcom County. You know, the situation is, this is not a anti-labor stance. I'm looking at this as a pro-worker stance and supporting the workers of our community. I initially, after the bond was passed for the jail, I met with county executives and then all the county council members, encouraging them and providing a paper to show them how we can look at creating the best situation for workforce development, developing our local economy, and supporting our local workforce by trying to make sure the jail is going to be built by predominantly local contractors and local workers. And so that's when intrigued all of us to go to the meeting when we met with Councilmember Galloway, because we do want our major projects to be here local. We also want our community to benefit. Councilmember Galloway talked about a few things of building green and sustainability and maybe providing childcare and stuff along those lines. I don't think any of our contractors have any objection to that. Those are all good things. But those aren't things that are determined by the contractor. That's determined by the owner of the project. It's what they're wanting to pay and what they're wanting to put out for that project. That is not the obligation of the contractor. That'll be something that'll be put into the contract documents that they're going to be required to take care of. Many of the things that are being discussed can be easily done within the contract documents. And in this situation, we are in the best scenario right now for an equitable footing for bidding publicly. Because as stated earlier, there is apprenticeship, there's safety, and there's prevailed wage. All of them are applicable, whether union or non-union. You have the best opportunity to get more bidders onto your contracts. And in this case, you have a far greater possibility of having a greater number of local workers that are going to be participating in these major projects in our community. I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thanks.
Hello, my name's Dan Arnold. I'm the General Superintendent.
I got one. I did leave out one thing.
Just kidding.
Yes, sorry. But through some of our discussions, we had provided a letter to the county council about many of the things I just talked about, how we could make this work, community benefits, but basically removing all the aspects of the project labor agreement. We had also been reached out to by the small cities after a presentation with the Whatcom County Business and Commerce Committee. They then also submitted a letter to council, Whatcom County Council, to oppose implementing the community benefits agreements as written with the project labor agreement language. And also, there was the Lummi Business Council. They are in opposition to project labor agreements being implemented into large capital projects. And then one other piece that I failed to mention was December 20th, or January 20th this year, federal court ruled against and struck down PLA language, and that they stated that it was actually project labor agreements are reduce competition, increase costs, and create inefficiencies for contractors and procurement officials. And these are many of the things that you will hear from many contractors and people that are looking to, make sure it's a fair and equitable situation. And that's what we're wanting to have, a fair and equitable situation for your contract bidding.
And Lance, before you leave, you had a way of phrasing something I just need rephrased.
Yeah.
Because English is my second language. You talked about how dues were paid in.
Yes.
That employees didn't necessarily use.
Yeah,
Explain that and
what will happen,
bring it down to the third grade level so I can.
And I'll touch on that. in a little
yeah, actually Pete will be covering that in more depth.
Okay.
So, Dan?
Sure.
I'm sure. Sorry.
Hello, Dan Arnold here, General Superintendent for Dawson. Just want to go over a couple things. I'll do a brief.
Go ahead.
You just all over.
brief review of where I am, where I've came from, just so you can get an idea. So I started my career in Alaska, did 12 years as a union carpenter, from foreman to superintendent. I've been with an open shop for the last 12 years, so you could say I've seen both sides. Now I'm the advocate and lookout for our carpenters, laborers, and operators here at Dawson. In considering a project labor agreement or other union mandates, I would like you to consider, here in Whatcom County, good construction workers are in demand. They are interviewing us and choosing where they want to work. If we're not providing top wages, best tools, safe, clean job sites, they will not choose to work here at Dawson. This creates an employee-friendly market, which makes my job sometimes a little difficult, but I pride myself on coming through the field and personally knowing the struggle of making it as a craft worker. And I'm here to help each and every one of our craft workers. I would offer for any of you that might be curious the opportunity to sit down with any of our workers, apprentices to field leaders, and ask them whatever you like. You might hear how we've given multiple field-wide wage raises without being asked for it, or maybe gift cards being sent out during the holidays just to take the edge off that holiday stress and help fill the freezer. We do all of this because we value our craft workers. They make us successful in this great community. Number two, having a third party represent you as a worker really isn't needed in this market because besides, the construction unions charge a lot for their services. As we spoke about, the apprenticeship programs. Every union carpenter pays, I believe it's 93 cents an hour. We've partnered with the AGC. We cover that cost. The company covers it. None of our people pay a union or an apprenticeship checkoff fee. We actually pay our apprentices to go to school. While they're in class, they're paid their normal wage to go get training and be better. Union carpenters pay roughly $9 for every hour worked to ensure they have insurance. Insurance is great, totally understand that, but that's cost, right? That doesn't stop after 40 hours a week. It doesn't stop after 2,000 hours a year. It's every hour worked. That's $9 an hour that comes off of that worker's paycheck. Now, no matter the fact if maybe they're tribal, maybe they have a spouse that has insurance, maybe they're still on their parents' insurance, there is no opting out. It's one size fits all at that point. $7 an hour if you fail. $7 an hour for retirement, which if you fail to finish the vesting process, I believe is 3 years without a permanent break, that money is gone. And so on, we go down to $6 an hour for union dues and PTO accounts, roughly $6 an hour. What does all that look like for a craft worker in a typical year? $1,900 for the apprenticeship deduction, $18,000 for insurance, $14,000 for retirement, $12,000 for dues and PTO. With taxes and other various deductions, round up to $49,000 real dollars not coming home for the craft work on an average year, lost to the unions because they don't allow for folks to opt out. It's one size fits all, and if you don't fit, you'll lose that money. Third, if we really want to do something for our local workforce, the number one complaint by far we hear is the lack of affordable housing options available. We have a housing crisis, and taking more out of the worker's check to pay the union is not the answer. I would remind everyone here today that multiple studies show that PLA agreements increase construction costs 10 to 20%, which will slow down construction and push the housing prices higher and higher by keeping inventory down. That's all I got. Pete.
Thank you, Dan. Hey, Lance, how do I work this thing? It's, okay, perfect. Okay. Hey, thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. There's 4 main points we'd like you to take away from on project labor agreements. And the first is a project will cost significantly more if you have a project labor agreement in place. Most studies show 10 to 20% cost increase. As a general contractor, we have first-hand experience where we've worked for government-mandated PLAs. And even California Governor Newsom in his veto of PLAs said they didn't have the budget for project labor agreements. And I've had a career of estimating project costs. I could sit anybody down that wanted to see why the cost impacts of a project and walk you through the mechanism of how that would work. but it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how much your project will cost, how much more it will cost. And if you think about the Mercy projects you just saw up on the board, which, congratulations.
Well, you built it.
Yeah, well, thanks. So, on time and under budget, yeah, so, you know. But there's probably a 70% merit shop crew and a 30% union crew on that first job. If it was a PLA mandated project, it'd be 100% union, and we'd lose 70% of the low bidders on that project. And then if you look at the Phase 2 Mercy, Ram Construction, another merit shop contractors on board for that job. And again, if it was a PLA mandate, Ram would not have been in the running there. In fact, the only three proposals, I believe, for that project were all merit shop contractors. So we're in a largely merit shop-based county. I believe 87% of the contractors here, the workforce here is merit shop. So that's what would be taken off the table if a PLA was put in place. First point is the project will cost significantly more. The second point is union representation. They provide a lot of value, but they also charge a lot for their services. Right off the top, it's about $10,000 a year annually for a journeyman, full-time journeyman carpenter that would be paying out for dues. 5% of a carpenter's wages goes to dues, and there's some other add-on costs, but it's about $10,000 a year off their check that if they're represented by the union, they're paying to the union, where if they're with a merit shop contractor, they're not paying any of that money. They take that money home. The second, as Dan touched earlier, is the health care. And the real kicker with the health care, it's for the folks who already have it covered. If they're Native Americans, retired military, if their spouses have coverage, or if they're young and they can buy insurance for a quarter of the cost. That $20,000 a year comes off their check whether they need it or not. They cannot opt out. Where with merit shop contractors, the worker can opt out of that requirement. So there's another $20,000. Then the third bucket, if you will, is the pension and annuity. And that, in round numbers, is another $20,000 that comes off the worker's check. And if they do not vest in 3 years, that the union retains that money. So that could, if there's a government mandated or report mandated PLA, and somebody goes onto a job for a year and a half or 2 years, they would contribute close to $40,000 and then walk away from those contributions. So it is, it's not for everyone, let's say. Some people it works, but it doesn't work for everyone. The third thing we wanted to touch on is the majority of our county workforce is non-union, and I think it's like over 90% of minority women and small businesses are non-union. So the very people we're trying to help with a lot of these policies, it actually hurts them, and they would steer clear of the work. And I really encourage you to read the letter from Lummi Nation. They speak to all these points of why they're so opposed to a project labor agreement. And that's why over 80 firms contacted Lance and said, hey, we're opposed to this. So it damages the folks we're trying to help the most. Then the fourth point I wanted to leave you with was, unions provide a very skilled workforce, but unions have zero accountability and zero responsibility for the outcome of a project. They'll tell you that they can help with schedule or they can help with costs, but they have zero responsibility. That's the general contractor. So unions, in fact, let's see, in fact, one of the contractors with one of the worst reputations in the county is a union contractor. And I'll share that name offline, but that, again, with zero accountability or responsibility, so it's the contractor who's responsible for the schedule, the budget, for the safety, for the quality. And again, it's the contractor's competency and integrity has nothing to do with the workforce. It's everything about the contractor, who you're hiring direct. So in closing, PLA will cost your project significantly more. It costs the workers who are forced to join a PLA or go through a union to work on a county or port project significantly more. It hurts the small local minority businesses, and there isn't any accountability for project performance. So we appreciate the opportunity to speak on the impacts of project labor agreements, and available to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Questions or comments, Commissioner Bell?
You stated the Lummies had an objection. Can you summarize that letter? Because I don't see it. And then a couple of those displays that you put on can we get a copy of those? Or is there a hot link?
Yeah,
I'll distribute the whole presentation to the commission. The Lummi letter is in the presentation.
was it? It's in
It's
there.
included.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
give me the Cliff Notes version?
Well, basically that they were opposed to because many of their tribal workers do not, join the union. A lot of times for the reasons that Pete had mentioned, they often have their health care and those items taken care of.
And they have their own training facilities, and yeah, I really encourage you to read that, but it's harmful to the tribal workers, so.
So when you went through your list, you said insurance was $9, retirement was $7, and dues was $6. So there's about $22 an hour.
Yeah, if you look up in the red there, it's 2338.
I'm good.
Yeah, you
I
did pretty good.
Did the math in my head.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
okay.
Yep. That's what I got.
All right.
Okay.
I just want to reiterate, this really does not impact the port from a substantial standpoint right now. We're interested in economic development. And I happen to be listening to the mayors discuss this. And it's the reason you're in front of this body today is that there were some concerns about what it would do to economic development down the road. So I heard a lot about the wages, and I heard a lot about the employees, but really our concern is how do we grow this economy? How do we make sure we've got quality housing? One of the things that you said that I didn't get enough background on was how does this impact private builders on housing? If you're just a single builder and you're building a house in the county, are you subject to this?
Oh, when it get built, we have trouble making apartment projects pencil or housing pencil, and you add on additional government regulations and PLA requirements. Yeah, the guys just wouldn't build.
So the single-family home would be impacted.
Yeah, absolutely, if that was part of it. Yeah. Well, that's what's in the draft ordinance, so the draft may change, but yeah.
Do you want to come up and address this real quick? I don't want us to spend much time having a union, non-union debate
No.
here. That's not really our purpose, but.
I'm not here to do any of that.
did
This
want to
is
just give you a moment
the
here.
Carpenter's Schedule A, so I think I'd be a good source to maybe add a little bit of context to it. These numbers are very misleading because it's prevailing wage that we're talking about. So unless you guys can argue, the package that's being shared here would be the same package that a non-union contractor would be paying, right? Would not be receiving these crazy outrageous numbers that you guys are running here. This is not what the employee pays, right? So if you look at the line items here, the total taxable wages to the left, those are what the employee pays, right? That is what you make. $61.54 an hour is what you make, right? The $5.96 for the pension and annuity, that's an addition to $55.58, which gets you the $61.54. Every other line item to the right of that is paid by the contractor. So these misleading numbers that we're paying $50,000 a year annually as a member, and yet I can still afford to buy a house, and yet I can still afford to have food on the table, I must be making $500,000 a year the way that this graph looks. So these are very misleading numbers, very misleading slideshow. In fact, if you guys were to pull up the contractors that you have on there, HB Hansen, who was listed on there, I reached out to them. They never even were given permission to put their name on that. So a lot of this is misleading. I also want to just elaborate a little bit. This is prevailing wage that we're talking about, meaning this isn't affecting the private entities that are being discussed. This is already a platform, a level playing field that's been set. This isn't going to cost the jail 20% more because the jail is going to be done with the prevailing wage language used. I don't see how this could negatively impact it 20%.
Didn't explain to me, and I really regret saying this because I thought DeYoung was in New Zealand, but now I realize I've just subjected myself to another hour and a half conversation with him. But why do you need it then? Right?
The intent and the
Why do you
spirit
need
of this is to get more of the community on these job sites. I visit job sites all the time, Harcourt being one that I've been to. I'll tell you what, the people working on that project, for the most part, are not people who live in Bellingham, not people who live in Whatcom County. They don't live in Skagit County. They don't live in Snohomish County. They live in Seattle. They live outside of state. That's why you guys are seeing the terrible performance that you're seeing on that. They're not skilled workers. They don't impact the community positively because the paychecks that they're receiving, nonetheless, are terrible. They're not being able to provide that money back to the community that you guys support.
A lot of hyperbole on both sides.
This
so-
is, yeah, and this whole PowerPoint, I'm so glad I stayed, was so one-sided without providing supporting documentation. I could give you a PowerPoint that says how PLAs are the best thing in the world and everyone who's going to be on them is going to be a millionaire. I don't have that, but I could put a PowerPoint without supporting documentation that shows that. This to me is clearly probably not intended to have me or other people who work as union members
That
in
is
this, I'm still
not
talking, in this conversation. This is absolutely blasphemy. And I can also go into other things why this is important. And Pete, by all means, elaborate on this.
Okay.
No, I just want to ask one last little thing. Sunnyland Elementary School, they used a non-union contractor, Hernandez Framing, right? Or not Hernandez, Casabella, who wasn't able to actually pay their workers the appropriate rate, so they misclassified them. They actually put a lien on the property so that they couldn't even actually finish the school, which I believe Dawson bailed them out, but it was their own subcontractor that they used. This is why we need to lift the tide to raise all boats. This is absolute blasphemy, crazy, big business over trying to support the workers who should be here talking. I don't see a
Lance.
Dawson worker here. I see a Dawson
Zach.
superintendent.
Zach.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zach.
Calm down,
I think
calm
we're
down
gonna.
here. We're getting carried away.
So,
I think we're
but
gonna
I
wrap
would-
up on the discussion here. I said
Anybody
earlier.
else?
Is it on the same topic we just went through?
No, not necessarily. I just wanted to say thank you for your time. I greatly appreciate it. All I would ask is that if there is, a stance that, a neutral stance, why don't we open this up and have a true workshop session that we could present both sides and have a fair dialogue over. And I hope everyone has an amazing night, and I do appreciate your time to listen to our concerns regarding both matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?